And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Matt Huber. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. Thanks for
Good.
having me.
Thanks for coming on this episode. It's going to be a pleasure speaking with you. So you are the Associate Professor, Geography and the Environment at Syracuse University, Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. And your specialties is a list that's very intriguing. I mean, each one of these items we could have a whole podcast episode on, but it's generally, political economy, historical geography, energy and capitalism, climate politics, resource governance, and social theory, all of which are amazing topics. So I just briefly want to skim over some of them in the time we have today. And you've got your books out, Climate Change as Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet, and as well Lifeblood, Oil Freedom and the Forces of Capital. So welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. That climate change book will be out next year. It's not quite out. So.
Oh, I see that. Yes, it's coming out in 2022, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Great. So I wanted to ask you, maybe right off the bat, we've got, various sort of social systems that are set up. Currently, I believe we're in capitalism mode. And just generally, we might have started with primitive communism, ancient mode of production, the feudal mode of production. And, currently, as I said, we're in capitalism.
Right.
So just right off the bat again as well, capitalism, a lot of people associate capitalism with greed. But if you look at the textbook definition of capitalism, it's really the privatization of a company, right? Where before in the feudal system, it was the royalty who was looking after the company. Previously it might have been the government looking after the company.
Right.
So capitalism really is the privatization of an enterprise, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, private ownership of what we call the means of production. So where you have not, private owners that control production, but the other thing is it's not just one private owner. Typically, it's typically a sort of chaotic mixture of many private owners that are competing with each other for a market, and they're all sort of narrow-mindedly focused on one goal, which is to basically make a profit on their investment and reinvest that profit and accumulate those profits into growth and accumulation in their company. And so it's that private ownership, but also the context of a kind of anarchic market competition that actually creates, like you were saying, like in feudalism, like the monarch, they actually, the feudal system, like the lords and the monarch actually had quite a lot of control and political control over the economic system. Whereas capitalism is this very uncoordinated and kind of chaotic market system that is sort of left to its own devices and doesn't have anything like a central plan or a coordination that can achieve goals that we might have.
So with some of the, sort of labels or, maybe stereotypes that people associate capitalism with, like say greed, power, corruptness, evil, things like that. In your opinion, is it the fault of the system, or is it just a reflection of who's running the system? Because I've always felt, and I've said it on other episodes, that, a business is really just a magnification of who the person is internally. And, if you're a good person, it'll come out in the business. And if you're not a good person, that as well will come out, right?
Well, it's a mixture. I actually lately have become a little frustrated with the kind of total systemic arguments that just say, this capitalism that's causing all this and individuals don't matter. I really do think we really need to be clear that, like you were saying before, it's a class of people that do own and control and profit from, and it's really a minority of society that actually is in this position to own and control the sort of the bulk of the economy. And, I think in a certain sense, capitalism as a system is, like I said before, it's hardwired for what you might call greed, but it's just that if an individual capitalist doesn't make profit at the expense of their competitors, i.e. if they're not greedy, then they're going to lose in the competition to other capitalists. And so it's not that they're sort of morally reprehensibly greedy, it's just that the system is itself requires them to make the most profit, accumulate those profits, and reinvest those profits into their business. And I do think, again, it's more the system of competition that actually limits the ability of a capitalist to be either good or bad or whatever, morally speaking, because they're so constrained by these, like I said before, anarchic forces of competition that are fundamentally out of their control. So even one of the Marx's greatest sort of insights is he's pointing out that it's not only the workers that are fundamentally alienated from capitalism and fundamentally sort of impoverished by it, but it's the capitalist class, which is fundamentally lacks control over the system because they're ensnared in these forces of competition that even, the most powerful company in the world, say Ford Motor Company, even they sort of got a little fat and happy and then started losing in the competitive game to other auto companies in, let's say, the 70s and 80s and 90s. So it's those forces of competition that really limit the, you could say, agency or ability of individuals to kind of shape the system to their moral desires.
And with that competition, a classic example of recent times would be Netflix versus Blockbuster, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's I actually teach this in my class, where, again, not to get too in the Marxist weeds here, but his theory of value is rooted in what he calls socially necessary labor time. And so fundamentally, people say, it's a labor theory of value. It is to an extent, but it's also about time. And one of the things Netflix did was rapidly speed up the production of content so that they were able to produce television, film in weeks, where the normal time it took to produce those things was months before. So they not only reshaped like the retail market of how you access film and rent movies, but they actually fundamentally disrupted, as they like to say, they fundamentally disrupted how we produce film and media and content by being able to produce these shows and these films so fast and just churn out this content that really shook things up in the whole industry, I'd say.
And these are the TV shows and the movies made specifically for Netflix that you're speaking of, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And any reason why they were able to do that? I mean, they were going up against major competitors who have been, stalwarts in the film industry, right?
Yeah, and again, like
going against the taxi, companies, something like that, or
yeah, the big that's a good example. It's the big cable behemoths and the film production companies, which again, like you would think they had consolidated their power over the film industry for many decades. And then again, I think there are questions, as we've all, I think, noticed with the never-ending scrolling of content on Netflix. There's some quality problems with this speed up, but for every clunker they produce, they do always churn out like these hit shows, let's say Queen's Gambit or something like that, that makes a big splash. And again, I think at least there's an article I assigned to my students that makes the argument that fundamentally what they did was just fundamentally speed up how long it takes to produce this type of content and really challenge. When you speed those things up, obviously you can produce them at much cheaper levels. So.
Sure. And that's the other thing with businesses. Once you speed up production and consumers get used to that tempo, there's no going back, because they're hooked now, right? Even more.
Right.
Yeah. With where we are in capitalism, do you have any thoughts on how we got here? Is this something that just sort of naturally happened? Did the consumers control this, or was it the higher authorities that decided change was nigh, and it went that way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely would not say it's something that just came naturally, because one of the that's something my students and anyone you talk to will sort of say. They'll say, "Oh, isn't it just human nature that we're greedy and that we're selfish and all this stuff?" But actually, you look into human history and you find countless examples of various types of societies that were shaped much more by cooperation and sharing and reciprocity. And not that in those societies there weren't selfish people. I mean, humans are a complex species, and we can be selfish and in a cooperative society, just as I think it's very clear to me, at least, in a capitalist society that's geared towards sort of self-centered individualist accumulation. Even in that society, every day we see people that are kind to one another. They share with one another. They help each other out. But when the whole society sort of at the economic level is geared towards cooperation or communal property, then it's just going to be a fundamentally different type of society. So, I mean, the story of how capitalism emerged is really complicated, but ultimately it had to do with this increasing, privatization of all of. To me, I'm a very environmental thinker. To me, it's really rooted in the privatization of the land and the private control over the land, which forced the masses of people off the land, and then increasingly created this kind of two-tier society of people that owned property and owned productive assets, who were able to accumulate wealth off that property, and then an increasing mass of people that owned nothing and were forced off the land and had no means of subsistence and no means of making a living. So they were forced to work for a wage in the market to survive. And as that, I mean, again, it took centuries, but as that sort of consolidation of those two classes in society started to really generalize and expand, that's where you started to get capitalism. And again, as you start to expand this kind of private ownership model based on market competition, you also get this sort of structural drive toward innovation and technological, basically increasing labor productivity, because firms that can do that will beat out the others in this, like I just explained that, like Netflix, in this relentless sort of competitive struggle to improve labor productivity to beat out your competitors, led to this kind of, to be clear, like this system that actually had tremendous capacity to produce technological innovation and produce a large amount of material wealth, even if it was highly concentrated. So, that's the short story of how I would explain it.
Got it. Yeah. And I like that, you mentioned that with something like innovation under capitalism is a good thing, because it happens, like you're saying, much faster than it might normally have under, a system that's owned by fewer people, that has a lot of, maybe red tape and bureaucracy, mm-hmm. and also the speed of production, which is important, because sometimes, like we've seen recently with vaccines, when
right.
we first heard news about them, it's going to take 10 years to come out, but it was out within 1 year, I think.
Yeah.
And we're still sort of going through the motions of that, but that's important for innovation and speed, and capitalism has aided that, right?
Yeah, and I actually think the vaccines are a good example of an industry that's actually rather monopolistic and thinking of the word turgid. I'm not sure if that like very like rigid and actually not a very innovative and dynamic industry because of their monopolistic structure. Um, and most of their activity, the pharmaceutical companies, is basically developing these lifestyle drugs that they can basically get consumers to take, like everything from cholesterol drugs to erectile dysfunction drugs, or
Yeah.
drugs that people could take like week after week, but that will make them lots of money because the more you buy them, the more it's a better business model. Um, Goldman Sachs did a sort of analysis of the pharmaceutical company, and they sort of warned the pharmaceutical industry that life-saving drugs and drugs that cure diseases are not a good business model because you take the cure and then you're done. So this is all to say that developing vaccines is not particularly profitable for this industry that really focuses much more on these lifestyle drugs. And so, but when it came to the whole world was collapsing, and it was clear that particularly governments like the United States were going to funnel billions of dollars into these pharmaceutical companies to produce these vaccines. Yeah, it's hilarious. Like they came up with it so rapidly. And now people are saying that this messenger RNA vaccine that they've miraculously come up with, that this might lead to massive new innovations in cancer treatments and various other vaccines. Like they might be able to lead to them creating what is like the Holy Grail vaccines, which is a universal flu vaccine that you would only need to take once. And so just this crisis kind of forced them to do this innovation that honestly I think they could have done decades ago, but they've really spent most of their time spending money on advertising and developing these drugs. And let's also be clear that they don't spend much money on like developing antibiotics that resist all these new bacteria that resist antibiotics, and fighting malaria and all these like diseases that are like real human civilizational threats. They don't really care much about because they can develop like Flomax that will allow older people to like not have to urinate all the time when they go golfing or something. So like that, like it's honestly, it's like just a total like social failure that we just allow our medicine industry to be controlled by for-profit private entities, which clearly this is something to me like education that should be a public good and developed for the public interest and not something developed for profit.
Yes, and that's the other thing too, when they say that there's no money in being healthy, right? So, but then there's no one to pay money when everyone's dead. So that's the other extreme, when you have to find this balance and come up with vaccines and it's also something, there's the timeline aspect of it, there's the red tape, bureaucracy aspect of it, and there's also the collection of different minds and viewpoints when you come together to solve a problem. And a classic example of that is with the X Prize, where you're seeing people from all walks of life. You need no prior degrees or prior certificates, or you don't have to be vetted for any sort of certain subject to come up with a solution. And because of that, we'll see advances. And now Elon Musk, I believe, with Peter Diamandis, announced the Carbon Prize. And we're going to see a lot of good things come out of it. And like you're saying with the vaccines, multiple opportunities have presented itself, and will open up a whole new can of worms, which will better society in the end. So it's a good thing that we're having these different minds come together also to solve a problem.
Yeah, and I also want to disabuse your listeners of the idea that actually like all the greatest innovations come purely from the private sector and capitalists, which actually, there's a wonderful book by a political economist named Mariana Mazzucato called The Entrepreneurial State, which basically traces some of the most important innovations over the last several decades, whether it be the internet or GPS systems or medical technologies like vaccines and other pharmaceuticals. Almost all those innovations can be traced to the state and to government investment in research. And one of her most clever ways of explaining this is that everything that's smart in your smartphone really is rooted in government research. And a lot of it, to be honest, is defense in the United States, like Defense Department research that funnels billions of dollars into innovation, into technical development. And so that's sort of one of the weirdest things about the time we live in, where people act like it's only the Elon Musks or the Jeff Bezos who innovate and disrupt, but you actually, particularly for the case of the pharmaceutical companies, like you actually see most of the innovations being done by public sector entities.
Got it. Okay, no, that's a good point. I wanted to ask, because I always don't believe there's a one size to fit all. Like you alluding to earlier, we are different people. We're a composite of different sort of environmental, cultural teachings and influences. We're stimulated by different things. So to have one economic system fit everyone is a little bit sort of extreme, because again, we have different needs, depending on if we know it or not. And you did an article, it's on your page from a blog on COVID-19 and the capitalist food system. Mm-hmm. And here you mentioned how the agricultural system is responsible for spreading the virus because it was controlled by private for-profit capitalists. And you were looking at sort of bringing some sort of socialism aspect mm-hmm. to the agricultural system. So I was thinking this is a nice way of, rather than sort of a one size system fit all industries, maybe we can move towards a world where the system might match specific industries. It doesn't have to, match all industries. Just like we see with currency, we have different currencies, and now we're having cryptocurrency, come on the block. And mm-hmm. who says that everyone should, follow, one certain way? We could have them all coexisting at the same time. We could still be bartering, in this time and age. We mm-hmm. could pay for something with that, or with crypto, or, with US dollar currency, or the yen, or, etc. So what are your thoughts on there being sort of multi-systems, economic systems set up, as you alluded to with, socialism with the agricultural industry?
Yeah, I think it's a little difficult because we're increasingly, we have a lot of people that want to build these kind of localized systems, whether it be like a urban garden system that feeds people in the neighborhood, or full on commune, or what some folks call transition town, where they're trying to kind of localize agriculture. But the fact is, for more and more, massive percentage of humanity is basically, like I kind of said before, has been thrown off the land and forced into the market. And insofar as those folks rely on money to survive, whether it be crypto or dollars or whatever currency, they are kind of participating in a system that is globalized. And so they are connected to you and me, to everyone else who uses money and is in these markets. So the kind of socialist story is that that capitalism actually does this. It kind of brings humanity together. through these markets, and it actually creates the conditions through which human liberation on a planetary scale could be achieved on the basis of this capitalist system that kind of connects everyone together, in which in that system, production would be geared toward not profit, but toward human needs. And it's very clear to me, I think you can debate whether or not various sectors should be run on the basis of profit or market coordination. There's probably good reason to have profit orientation in some sectors, or maybe I wouldn't say that, but some people would.
Yeah.
But clearly, like, we do it as a society, sort of want to put bright lines in certain areas. Like, there's been a lot of politics lately in the United States that is trying to claim that, like, healthcare, for instance, should be a human right. And it's a very sort of basic principle that people shouldn't have to die because they lack money to afford the healthcare. But to me, food is another system. It's another commodity or another aspect of human life that is so fundamental that it seems odd to me that we will go on saying healthcare is a human right, but food isn't. But if we actually organized food as a human right and not as a commodity we produce for profit, it would be fundamentally different type of system. And so I think, actually, even though I presented this idea of, like, the global working class rising up to take control of a globalized capitalist system through, socialism, which I love that idea, but actually what I think that would entail is actually creating a lot of freedom of individuals, communities all around the world to actually have the free time and have the ability to engage in alternative systems of production, not just of food or the basics of life, but also music, art, literature, and things that really define human existence, culture. So I actually think, again, we actually have to, if we do live in a world where, nearly most of the 7 billion plus of us are ensnared in this global capitalist system, if we really want to liberate all of humanity, we need to also create a system that would basically give everyone what they need to survive, but then give them free time to develop different types of systems. And so through that kind of liberation at a planetary scale, you could have the diversity that you're talking about, like diverse systems and diverse ways of being and living all throughout the world.
Sure, because it's almost like a spider's web, because if you pull on one part of the web, it's going to pull on the bottom part of the web, right? So yeah, it's not going to exist in its own silo. It's going to affect something down the line, and there's no system out there that's a perfect system, because again, we're all individuals with different needs. We're pro con for different systems. Some root for capitalism, some root for socialism. Those who root for capitalism say, no, why are you trying to limit the sky for me if I get into socialism? I'm capable of this much potential. Why should I downsize my potential to accommodate everyone on the planet, right? It's the unique needs of everyone.
Yeah, that's one of the things that sort of a lot of people sort of think Marx was all about, creating this kind of collectivist, homogenous system where everyone would have to conform to the kind of socialist. And obviously the history of the Soviet Union kind of lends credence to that interpretation. But basically, if you read Marx directly, what he's most interested in is the potential of individuals to be free. And he's really interested in the idea of freedom and what freedom means. And for him, if you want to have a free society, you better have a really actually pretty well-coordinated, productive system that can take care of everyone. And if you can provide that material basis, what he called the realm of necessity, if you can really, let's say, automate that, or if you can make sure that is done in the most efficient way possible, where everyone's sharing in the necessary work that needs to be done, then you can widen what he called the realm of freedom, where people have the time and the capacity to develop their capacities and their individual development as people. So surely in capitalism, some people are able to, reach for the skies, as you said, and develop their individual capacities and become rich millionaires. But as we know, the ability of most people to do that is very limited. For most people in capitalism, the vast majority of people, they're really kind of stuck in a system, kind of like a hamster wheel that they can't really get out of, because perhaps they were born into very impoverished circumstances, and they're basically stuck basically working 2-3 jobs where they can barely stay afloat just to make a living. And so the idea that Marx really thought would really expand individualism, expand human freedom, was to develop a system that really made sure it took care of everyone's material needs and necessities as a basis for really allowing people to pursue individual freedom to its highest extent.
Sure. And, that's at some point is getting into, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if there's at least, a minimum level for a system to take care of those needs, then anything above and beyond is up to the person, right? To do or not do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, where things go. And I'm hoping, as always, I'm a very positive person. So it's headed in a direction that is sustainable for humanity. Because, like you were saying before, the state has done a lot of good things. They've brought it out. And my feeling is, they sort of maybe, keep it to themselves, and the timeline has been a bit longer. So now with, individuals sort of, being able to put their 2 cents worth in and, produce. And we've seen recently with this upcoming space race that, individuals can, have their own, spaceship, going out into space, where before it was maybe limited to NASA. And, I draw the analogy to someone like Bill Gates, who had Microsoft and, put out a decent product that, took over the world.
Right.
But, we were sort of at the mercy of the software updates directed by the company. Whereas Steve Jobs with, the Mac OS system, Linux, it was open source and it was there for everyone to dabble with and collectively make it better. Mm-hmm. If I may ask finally, because you've got a pulse on it, where are we now in the timeline of capitalism? Are we at the peak or approaching the peak, or is it ending, or what's your opinion on that? Well, or maybe not ever, or...
Well, there's this funny thing where, for whatever reason, I've never really done the kind of genealogy of this, but I'd say in the kind of 60s, 70s, people started speaking of something called late capitalism. And, we were in late capitalism, but obviously it's been like 50 years. So if it was late capitalism in the 70s, then where are we now? The standard answer to this is that the one thing we know for sure is that capitalism won't last forever, because no economic system in human history has really lasted forever. There've always been changes, and as you said at the beginning, modes of production. So with the, we didn't get a chance to talk much about this, but with the ecological and climate crisis where it is, there's a lot of concern that there could be sort of, types of ecosystemic problems that lead to really darker future but a future that might not be capitalist, right? It could be something more resembling a feudalism, in a kind of dark Mad Max type of vision of the future. But obviously I am more hopeful that we again could actually, because one thing capitalism has done, and also the climate crisis has done, is it's reminded us that we are a single human species on this planet, and that we share this planet together, and that my sort of probably naive hope is that we could actually come together and kind of come to some sort of species level of coordination and governance that really, again, like that would just supersede this thing we call nation state governance, which is itself an artifact of like 17th century European political systems that would have seemed insane to people that lived in, say, the BC era, that you would have these nation states that have borders and pure territorial control over these areas. So obviously with the climate crisis, we're either going to come together and kind of towards what some fellow geographers, Jeff Mann and Joel Wainwright, call planetary sovereignty, or we're going to descend into a kind of neo-feudal sort of dark future. But I like to be hopeful, like you, that we could actually come together and really, take you could say a kind of a next step in human species awareness and come to try to sort of solve our collective problems on this planet of Earth. That's a cheesy place to end.
No, I'm with you on that, and I hope the next system will definitely be compassionism. So I'm aligned with you on that.
That would be nice.
Thanks very much for coming on the episode. And if people want to find out about your books or more about your work, where would you like them to be directed to?
They can Google Matt Huber Geography Syracuse and they'll find my page. And if they want to look me up on Twitter, my handle is at MattHuber78.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put those show notes in the well. Thanks again for coming on the episode, and I wish you well.
All right. Thanks so much.